Your soulmate hid a child from you. Their child asked one question that exposed everything. My beloved child. There is something your soulmate has been terrified you would discover, and last night, that secret almost came out in the most unexpected way possible. Not through a confession. Not through a message accidentally left open. Through a child. A child you were never told existed. For a long time, your soulmate had carefully kept this part of their life behind a locked emotional door, convincing themselves there would eventually be a right moment to tell you. But that moment kept getting pushed further away. Every time they imagined looking into your eyes and explaining the truth, fear stopped them. Fear that you would feel betrayed. Fear that you would question everything between you. And most of all, fear that you would walk away before hearing the reason they stayed silent. But last night, something happened that made hiding it almost impossible. Their child looked at them with complete innocence and asked one simple question. Your soulmate froze. Because that question was about you. The strange part is that the child already knew more about you than your soulmate realized. Your name had apparently been mentioned before. Maybe quietly during a phone conversation. Maybe your picture had appeared somewhere for just a second. Maybe the child had noticed the way your soulmate's entire expression changed whenever you came up. Children notice things adults believe they're hiding. And recently, this child had started putting those little clues together. Last night, while your soulmate was distracted, the question finally came, why haven't you told them about me? Silence. Complete silence. Your soulmate didn't know how to answer, because suddenly the secret wasn't only theirs anymore. Someone else could see exactly what they had been doing. Don't skip this, because what happened next changed the meaning of that hidden truth. Your soulmate didn't become angry with the child. They became emotional. Their eyes filled. Their voice weakened. And after several long seconds, they admitted something they had apparently never said out loud before. Hiding the child from you had stopped being about privacy a long time ago. Now it was about fear. But fear of what? That is where this becomes deeper than it first appears. Your soulmate wasn't simply afraid you would discover they had a child. They were afraid of what that discovery would make you believe about every moment they had shared with you. Every unexplained interruption. Every time they suddenly became unavailable. Every conversation where they seemed to stop themselves from saying more. Pieces you may have dismissed could suddenly fit together differently, and your soulmate knew it. Yet the child's question forced them to confront something even harder. If they truly imagined a future with you, how long could they keep an entire human being outside that future? The child apparently asked another question after seeing those tears, and this one hit even harder. It wasn't accusatory. It was innocent. Almost hopeful. And when your soulmate heard it, they made a decision they had been avoiding for far too long. Stay till the end, because the child's second question wasn't merely about meeting you. It exposed why your soulmate had been watching you so carefully all this time, and what they needed to know about you before finally telling the truth. The second question came so softly that your soulmate almost wished they had misunderstood it. The child looked at them and asked, "Are you afraid they won't want me?" Those words landed harder than anything your soulmate had prepared themselves to hear. Suddenly, the secret was no longer something they could justify as waiting for the right time. Their silence had consequences. Their child had begun wondering whether they were the reason you had been kept at a distance. Your soulmate immediately tried to reassure them, but their voice gave away something important. They couldn't promise how you would react because they had never given you the chance to react at all. And that realization broke through every excuse they had been using. Because underneath all their careful decisions was a truth they could no longer avoid. They had been quietly studying your heart, watching how you treated people, how you responded to complicated situations, and whether your kindness remained when life became inconvenient. They weren't only falling for you. They were trying to answer one frightening question: could they trust you with the most precious part of their life? That explains something you may never have understood before. There were moments when your soulmate seemed unusually interested in your thoughts about family, responsibility, forgiveness, or second chances. Questions that appeared casual may not have been casual at all. When you spoke about children, they listened differently. When you showed patience towards someone who needed extra understanding, they remembered it. And when you reacted compassionately to another person's complicated past, something inside them relaxed. Little by little, you were giving answers without realizing you were being asked anything. But here is where the story changes. Your soulmate eventually realized they had crossed a line. They were asking you to prove that you could accept a truth you didn't even know existed. That wasn't fair to you. And last night, their child somehow understood the problem more clearly than they did. After a long silence, the child asked, "What if they're waiting for you to trust them?" Your soulmate couldn't answer. Because those words touched the exact fear they had refused to name. That was the moment the hiding began to collapse. Your soulmate sat there thinking about every opportunity they had allowed to pass. There had been at least one moment when they almost told you everything. The words were right there. They had even imagined how they would begin. But then you said something completely innocent that made them panic and change the subject. Don't skip what comes next, because that unfinished conversation matters more than you realize. Your soulmate remembered it last night, almost word for word, and suddenly understood that they may have interpreted your words completely wrong. What they once heard as a warning might actually have been the safest invitation you could have given them. And when their child heard what you had supposedly said, the child noticed something your soulmate had missed entirely. One tiny detail changed the meaning of that conversation. Your soulmate went quiet again, reached for their phone, and looked at something connected to you that they had saved for a very long time. And what they saw made them realize the secret could no longer remain hidden. What they opened on that phone was not some dramatic piece of evidence. It was something far more personal, a message from you they had never deleted. At the time, your words had frightened them because you had spoken about honesty. You had said, in your own way, that the hardest truths were easier to accept than discovering someone never trusted you enough to share them. Your soulmate had focused only on the first half. They heard truth and immediately imagined losing you. But their child noticed the second half. Trust. That was the detail your soulmate had missed. Suddenly, everything turned upside down. The very words they thought gave them a reason to stay silent were actually telling them the opposite. And as they reread that message, the child asked, "Doesn't that mean they'd rather know?" Your soulmate stared at the screen. There was no comfortable answer anymore. Because yes, you deserved to know. And somewhere deep inside, they had known that all along. Then came another revelation. Their child admitted they had seen your picture before. Not once. Several times. Your soulmate was stunned and asked how. The answer exposed just how much of their feelings had been visible inside that home. Apparently, your soulmate had looked at your picture during quiet moments when they believed nobody was paying attention. Sometimes they smiled. Sometimes they simply stared at it. And once, according to the child, they looked emotional afterward and quickly put the phone away. That innocent observation left your soulmate speechless, because they had worked so hard to keep two parts of their life separate, yet their child had already sensed the connection. Stay till the end, because the next thing the child said pushed everything even further. They didn't ask whether your soulmate loved you. Somehow, they already understood that. Instead, they asked why someone they cared about so deeply was still being treated like an outsider. That question removed the final excuse. Your soulmate could protect their privacy, yes. They could move carefully. They could make sure their child felt safe and secure before introducing anyone new. But hiding the child indefinitely was different, especially while allowing their connection with you to grow deeper. So your soulmate made a quiet decision. They would tell you. Not through hints. Not by testing your reactions with another carefully disguised question. They would tell you clearly and accept whatever came afterward. But just before they began planning how to do it, their child said something unexpected. There's one thing you should tell them first. Your soulmate turned toward them, confused. What could possibly come before admitting they had hidden an entire child from you? The child explained, and suddenly your soulmate's expression changed. Because there was another piece of this story, something connected to why they became so protective of their child in the first place. And without that truth, you might misunderstand everything that happened next. The truth behind that protectiveness went back further than you realized. Your soulmate had once allowed someone close enough to become part of their child's world, believing that person would stay. Promises were made. Trust was built. The child became comfortable. Then everything changed. That person disappeared from their lives emotionally before eventually leaving completely, and your soulmate watched their child struggle to understand why someone who seemed permanent could suddenly become a stranger. From that moment forward, they made themselves a private promise. Nobody would enter their child's life until they were absolutely certain that person was serious. That promise explains the caution, but it doesn't erase the fact that you were kept in the dark. Your soulmate understands that now. The child understood it too. And what happened next surprised them, because instead of defending the secrecy, the child quietly said, "But they aren't the person who left us." Your soulmate looked up immediately. Those few words exposed the mistake they had been making all along. They had been protecting the future from something that happened in the past. Without meaning to, they had been measuring you against another person's choices. Every time your connection became deeper, old fear whispered that closeness could become another goodbye. So they delayed. They watched. They waited for some sign that you might eventually disappear too. But there was a problem: you kept doing the opposite. You remained consistent in ways they hadn't expected. You remembered little things. You noticed when something felt different. You gave them space without becoming cold. And even when they pulled back, you didn't immediately turn their hesitation into a battle. Something huge is waiting for you here, because your soulmate finally recognized that their secrecy wasn't only protecting their child anymore. It was also protecting themselves from having to risk believing in someone again. And once they admitted that, another uncomfortable realization followed. The longer they waited to tell you, the more likely their fear would create the exact loss they were trying to prevent. That realization changed their plan completely. At first, your soulmate thought they should simply confess everything at once, the child, the secrecy, the fear, all of it. But their child stopped them with another unexpectedly thoughtful question: are you going to tell them why you chose them? Your soulmate went completely still. Chose them? The child explained that if you were going to hear something painful, you also deserved to understand why your soulmate had allowed the relationship to become this meaningful despite being terrified. And suddenly, your soulmate knew exactly what needed to be said. There was a specific moment involving you, a moment you probably considered ordinary, that convinced them you were different from the person who had hurt their family before. They had never told you what that moment meant. They had never even admitted how closely they remembered it. But now it was going to become part of the confession. And when you discover what you did that day, you may finally understand why your soulmate fell deeper for you at the exact moment they were trying hardest not to. That moment happened on a day when your soulmate was unusually distant, and you probably assumed they were simply tired or distracted. They answered more slowly. Their attention kept drifting. At one point, they almost disappeared from the conversation completely. What you didn't know was that something involving their child had demanded their attention, and they were quietly handling it while trying desperately not to expose the secret. They expected you to become frustrated. They were prepared for questions, suspicion, maybe even an argument. Instead, you did something remarkably simple. You told them to take care of whatever mattered and that they didn't owe you an immediate explanation. Then you gave them space without punishing them for needing it. Your soulmate remembered those words because nobody had coached you to say them. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You didn't even know a child was involved. And that was exactly why your response affected them so deeply. Later that evening, after everything had settled, your soulmate looked at your message again. Their child was nearby, safe, and suddenly your soulmate imagined something they had been refusing to imagine. What if you actually could understand this life? Not a perfect version of it. The real version. Plans changing unexpectedly. Responsibilities coming first sometimes. A child needing reassurance. A relationship requiring patience instead of constant attention. For the first time, your soulmate didn't picture you as someone who might threaten that stability. They pictured you as someone who might respect it. That realization frightened them almost as much as it comforted them, because hope meant there was suddenly more to lose. So instead of telling you the truth, they became even more cautious. That is the contradiction they now regret. The moment that made them trust you should have brought them closer to honesty. Instead, it made the possibility of losing you feel real enough to keep them silent. But last night, their child unknowingly broke that cycle. After hearing about that old conversation, the child smiled and asked, then why do you think they would leave? Your soulmate had no answer. Not one based on anything you had actually done. Every answer came from an old wound, an old memory, an old person who wasn't you. And that realization finally gave them the courage to stop predicting your reaction before giving you the truth. They began preparing what they wanted to say, but there was one final detail they knew they couldn't hide when the confession happened. Don't skip this, because it changes the emotional weight of everything. Their child had already formed an opinion about you without ever truly meeting you, and before going to sleep, the child said exactly what they hoped would happen after you learned the truth. Your soulmate expected fear or hesitation. Instead, the child made one quiet request that brought tears to their eyes, and that request may be the reason your soulmate is finally ready to bring you into the part of their life they guarded more fiercely than anything else. The child's request was almost painfully simple: if they still want us after they know, can we stop hiding? Your soulmate felt those words settle into the room. Not because the child was asking for an instant family or some perfect ending, but because they were asking for honesty. No more lowered voices when your name came up. No more quickly turning over the phone when your picture appeared. No more pretending that someone important existed only in a separate corner of their life. Your soulmate realized their child had been carrying the confusion created by all that secrecy too. And suddenly, keeping you hidden from this part of their world no longer felt protective. It felt heavy. Your soulmate pulled the child close and promised something carefully, not that you would stay, because that choice belongs to you, but that you would finally be given the truth. Yet immediately after making that promise, another fear surfaced. What if telling you everything wasn't enough? What if the secrecy itself had already damaged something they couldn't repair? That question followed your soulmate long after the child had gone to sleep. They began rehearsing the conversation in their mind, rejecting one opening after another. There's something I should have told you. Too vague. I need to explain something. Too frightening. Every version sounded like another attempt to control your reaction. Finally, they understood that the confession had to begin with responsibility, not excuses. They needed to tell you they have a child. They needed to admit they deliberately withheld that truth. Then they needed to let you feel whatever you genuinely felt: surprise, disappointment, confusion, even anger, without demanding immediate forgiveness. That decision matters, because for the first time, your soulmate wasn't planning how to keep you from leaving. They were planning how to respect your right to choose after knowing everything. But while thinking through those words, they remembered something else. There was still one question about the child that you would almost certainly ask. And the answer carried another piece of the story they had never prepared themselves to discuss with you. It concerned the child's other parent and the boundary surrounding that part of their life. Your soulmate knew they couldn't leave that subject mysterious, because unanswered questions would only make the confession feel incomplete. But they also knew some details belonged to the child and deserved privacy. So they made another decision: tell you what directly affects your relationship, tell you enough to understand the situation honestly, but never turn another person's private history into entertainment or use it to excuse their own choices. That was when your soulmate finally stopped rehearsing and typed the beginning of a message to you. Their finger hovered above the screen. They read the first sentence twice. Then something unexpected happened. Their child, who apparently wasn't asleep after all, appeared nearby and saw the unfinished message. The child read only enough to understand what was happening, looked at your soulmate, and asked one final question. Your soulmate immediately deleted the opening sentence, not because they had changed their mind about telling you, but because the child had just shown them that they were about to make the biggest mistake of the entire confession. The child's final question was, "Why are you telling them in a message if this matters so much?" Your soulmate stared at the screen, realizing how fear had taken control again. They had promised honesty, yet they were still searching for the safest distance from your reaction.